Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast, van life edition. If you're watching on YouTube, you get to see a little bit of insight into our current van life setup.
I mean, you can't really see very much, but we are here in the van. We have a banner, so we still have that Consummate Athlete logo up. This is one you made with the Cry Cup machine.
Yes, I'm very proud of that.
Okay, still unsure if it's Cricket or Cry Cup, but we're going with that one today.
If anyone knows, maybe that can be like a listener write-in. How do you actually pronounce the vinyl cutting machine?
Maybe it's your choice.
Either way, we'd love to hear from you. So we are doing more Q&A episodes at this point. So definitely hit us up with all of your training, racing, nutrition, mindset, all of the questions. We love to chat about pretty much any and all aspects of endurance sport. And we have 3 really good questions today. At the moment, quick update, I guess. Like, we are van lifing, so I guess we should say like we're actually down in slightly warmer temperatures here. We headed south from New Jersey last week, and we've been in the van for 8 or 9 days, and training is going well. It's a little chilly. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that despite the fact that we came down south for warmer temperatures, we are still bundled up to record this episode, but otherwise things are going good. It's a good reminder about spending time outdoors and like being in the sunshine. I think we both have said this past week, just having a bit more time, like faces, with sun in them. I'd say like our skin is better, our digestion's better, and your mood is definitely better.
Well, I always felt like I was self-medicating myself by getting away in the winter when I was able to go for training camps and that sort of thing. So there you go. We're down here. It's good. We're very fortunate to be able to be down here and doing this. But yeah, let's...
Where I was going with that, sorry, I did just do a post on this for the site last week, but I do think it is just important to mention, even when you are back home in the winter, I think that time outside is so important because it's so easy, especially with the remote work. You can go, if you have a smart trainer, you can go days without ever going outdoors.
Right? Yeah, it takes a lot of effort for sure, and to get bundled up, and if you're bringing a dog or something, kids outside as well, there's a whole rigmarole to do that.
Yeah, but the benefits of just getting outside, I think a lot of people assume that exercising kind of equates with like the time outdoors. When you're talking about all of the studies that are the positives of nature, you think it's like, okay, well, that's the same thing as 10,000 steps. Good news, I'm getting that on my under the desk treadmill. But the two things do not equate. Like, they're both good. Not to say don't do the workout, but definitely the time outside, even in winter.
No, it's that entire environment piece where you're sort of embedding a bunch of these things into it, where, there's the time around trees and nature is supposed to decrease stress. But I think there's a lot too, the vision, where your eyes are looking onto the horizon versus onto a screen. I think there's something to that. And I wasn't even aware, I've heard and read a couple of different studies recently too around how that changes your perspective. If you're very narrow focused, then that can change sort of like if we're thinking about anxiety. Whereas if you broaden the scope towards the horizon, then this vision, the feedback from the vision is like, a little more expansive and not quite as, individualized or narrow, if you will.
It's funny. I had just heard about that as well.
Well, I think Huberman talked about it, right?
So I think that's making the rounds. Yeah. There we go. But at any rate, get outside, even if it's cold and crappy out. We'll definitely be back to that pretty soon, and I'm already kind of gearing myself up for it. But all right, with that said, first question. We've gotten this in a few different forms over the years here, but I think this is one worth coming back to time and time again. How to train best when periodization can't be done. In this case, we're talking about a firefighter who doesn't have any down weeks, so I assume that's pretty much the 3 days on, 4 days off, or 3 days on, 4 days off. Basically just a non-traditional, you're not working a 9 to 5. How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, stepping back, periodization, you could probably just call it planning. So I think you still have these phases that you would work in, and they talk about micro, meso, and macro cycles. So the firefighter cycle, most of us work on a 7-day week, or you could call that what was the smallest one I said? Microcycle. So that would be they might work in these like 4-day cycles maybe, right? Where it's 4 days on, 4 days off. So it's sort of more like that sort of rhythm. Most firefighters do train a little bit while they're at work. They'll do like, sometimes I just built a plan last week, I think, where it was more strength sort of, and maybe a little bit of cardio machine while they're at work. There's always the chance that this goes sideways, but that's true for everyone. Sure. Whether it's something goes sideways with family or work, there's always it might not work out. But generally what I've seen is most of them do get a bit of a strength workout in, or something, they get half an hour, during their day where they can do something. So yeah, I think on that microcycle, and then they know the month in advance, their schedule is pretty set. So again, they can sort of plan these out, and generally, they can sort of build, have a week that's a little heavier and a couple of weeks that are a little lighter. You could still take a rest week where those 4 days where you're off of work, you just don't drive so hard. So you could still do a fairly standard month, the mesocycle. You could still do that where it's 3 weeks where you do your 4-day block, your 4 days where you're training are like heavy or normal, and then on the 4th week you could still choose to take that a little lighter. So I don't think that the rules of if periodization or planning don't apply. On the macro cycle, then this is the year, or the towards your first A race, if you will. So this would be a series of mesocycles, or a series of months. Again, you're still going to go from general to specific. You're preparing for a spring classic, you're a firefighter, you're still going to train generally when it's winter, and then as you get closer to the spring, your training should start looking more like the main training. So I still think that applies as well. I don't know if that would not apply for some reason, right? So was there a question in there?
Well, I think how I was sort of thinking about this is a lot of pre-made training plans and traditional training plan stuff is catered toward the 9 to 5, 7-day week, work week, or 5-day work week, 2-day off kind of cycle. So I think the first thing I would suggest at this practically is really either working with a coach one-on-one to talk, whether it's just talking through a rough version of what this could look like for you, or a more serious coaching relationship, or we do have our custom 3-month plan that is actually made for the person with the person's schedule in mind. So I think a lot of the time this person is probably asking it because they've only ever seen the very traditional Monday to
Monday off. Yep.
Mondays are off, and Saturday, Sundays are big days. That's the only training plans they've ever been presented with. So that's just the only option that they've ever really seen. And I think when you work a kind of different, non-traditional set of hours, you kind of need to go to a bit more of a custom setup for you.
Yeah. I think that's it. And that's often, the nice thing is that often these firefighters, these emergencies, this would be like your paramedics, police. I'm trying to think someone else, some of these, the bigger one would be some of the people who work in mines where it's 2 weeks on for work and they're up in the middle of nowhere, and then 2 weeks where they can do whatever they want. That's also a sort of a wild training situation as well, right? So I think there's all sorts of different plans out there, and you're just sort of figuring out what fits. And the nice thing is that a lot of times 3 and 4 and 6 months out your exact schedule, which isn't the case for certainly lots of people, 9 to 5. There could be some more variation there in some ways. So that's actually a really great candidate for that 3-month plan, because the 3 months pretty to the letter what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Now, the only other thing I would ask with firefighting is, do you ever find, because you have you've worked with a fair number of whether it's firefighters or paramedics.
Well, and nurses, I should say, are the other one. I was trying to think of the other big one we have. Yeah, there's the nurses, doctors, who would be sort of the same, we're 12 hours cycle, but they don't work necessarily 5 days a week all the time.
Right. So what I was actually going to ask, though, is firefighting, you may have a 4-day on where you really never leave the fire station, right?
Sure.
Or maybe you have a couple of minor calls, but then you have a 5-alarm fire 1 week. So if you're in this situation, how do you account for the actual on-job physical demands and stressors? Would you add an extra rest day? or shift your high intensity workout? Just kind of on the broader scale, how do you manage that kind of stuff?
A lot of the people I've worked with the first day they are not working, so the first day off work. Sometimes it gets confusing with this because you're talking about like off day versus off of work, which isn't, in this case isn't the same thing. A lot of times that first day off of work, the first day of the 4 days where you can do whatever you want, basically. Again, usually they can't do whatever they want because they have to do stuff with their family. A lot of them have side jobs and hobbies and other stuff they do as well. So that first day of the 4 days you can train, we'll call it, is often not like it's not the heaviest day. So that might be 90 minutes of endurance training. Maybe there's some spin ups to get back coordinated, something like that. And that one then isn't so taxing that if it is a really stressful set of 4 days, or even just that last day, you're up all night and you haven't slept and that sort of stuff, then you do probably need to sleep a bunch, right? So there is that sort of, it sounds like a dream schedule in some ways, but you're right. You have to absorb it. So you don't necessarily want to come off and just hit those 4 days all the time as hard as you possibly can and spin yourself up and then go back into a super stressful situation, right? And you're right. Sometimes it's probably really cush and really nice 4 days at work where you do a bunch of strength training and sit around and, training exercises for your job as well. That's probably not the case a lot of times. So I would say taking that first day is a good advice usually. There's always the option, if it's you feel great and you could extend that, the weather's really good and then you can do that. I would say just in general, I would err on that side of leaving that first day to recover, get set up, get your food set up, get your sleep caught up. And then maybe you do day 2 and 3, maybe day 4, it would be heavier, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm. Okay, love that. And we'll include a link to 3-month plan and phone consults that we do if you are kind of interested in or if you do have a wacky schedule and really need some more structure to it. All right, before we get into the next question, just quick reminder, we are still working with AG1. So we have been using AG1, formerly known as Athletic Greens, for 2 years now. So every morning mixing that greens powder into morning hydration. It's one of my absolute favorite habits. I've actually recently tried a couple other greens powders because I was curious if the taste of other greens powders has improved over these. Have to tell you, it has not. But AG1, really actually genuinely enjoy the taste. It's got kind of a papaya, pineapple-y vibe, even though it is your greens, your adaptogens, your vitamins, your minerals, your probiotics, your prebiotics, all of the good things you need. 73 just sustainably sourced and great quality ingredients all in one. Makes life very easy, especially when we are, in fact, in the van.
That's right. And I mean, it's not free. It does cost money. So a lot of times people say, oh, that's, it seems like a fair bit per day, but we always look at it as, this could be replacing a probiotic. This could be replacing a greens powder. This could be replacing a multivitamin. This could be replacing a number of different supplements. Adaptogens are all popular now as well. This stuff's all in AG1 and it's NSF certified. So we know it's actually in AG1. So this is, I think, a thing where we also see that, it's one thing, you take it in the morning and it's just, it's all there. So you actually could be saving money versus what you're currently taking.
Mm-hmm. And right now, if you use our link, you can get 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of immune supporting vitamin D K2. It's these little droplets. They're delicious. In addition to your first package of AG1. So just head to drinkag1.com/MollyH. Again, drinkag1.com/MollyH to take ownership over your health today. All right. And definitely let us know what you think it tastes like, because I'm always curious. I feel like my papaya thing is probably really inaccurate, but that's how I feel about it.
That's right. I don't think Molly's ever had a papaya, but there you go.
I don't think I have. Okay, next question. I love this, actually. My wearable says to take an off day. Should I listen? So this comes up often now that not only do we have the Whoops and the Oura Rings and those really specific trackers, but even your Garmin watches, your smart watches, I think even Apple watches now are doing some level of whether it's HRV that they're recording or just taking into account what you did the day before and are giving you some kind of tips or advice for the day if you haven't turned off that function? I know I just got a new Garmin, the Forerunner 955, and it took me probably 4 days of using it to finally turn off all of the notifications, because I would turn one off and then another one would pop up, and I'm like, no, I'm productive, it's fine.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of them will say, some sort of, as you're warming up, it'll give you some sort of performance readiness, plus or minus, 1 to 4, which could be based on something that's relevant or not. And then after the workout, they tell you how many hours it can recover. And then, as you say, a lot of these, I think more to this question, a lot of your wearables based on HRV and resting heart rate in the morning will give you some sort of readiness. It's sometimes expressed as just an arbitrary number, 70 readiness or 10 readiness, for how ready you are to take on more stress, is sort of what those are roughly trying to tell you.
Right. And especially with stuff like that, I've even talked to some of Garmin's top researchers about this for articles for bicycling. A lot of the issue with some of that stuff is that it's not taking into account what your training plan is, what you're training for, where you are in your training cycle. It's sort of just saying, like, all things equal, you're not ready today. But your training plan might actually have been structured to be like, yeah, this is a hard week. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be tired by the end of it.
That's right.
So that's just a quick word on like those actual readiness scores and stuff like that.
For sure. And so we want to look at a few different things. This is, complicated, but not complicated. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you don't want to lose that you have a training plan and that you have your brain where you can like also assess, like, how do I feel today? And what we don't want is that these wearables should necessarily change the feeling.
But they absolutely do, right? Like if you wake up and you don't pause for a second, you just go straight to your Whoop or whatever has been, or Aura or whatever's been tracking your sleep, and it says you slept like crap, you're getting sick, like warning, 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 danger. And even HRV for training, an app that we absolutely love. If you just go to that and you don't input any subjective feelings, if you don't pause before you look at the number and think, how do I actually feel right now? I think it's very easy to not be taken in by your wearable, but to be influenced by your wearable, right? Like it says you're getting sick and suddenly, even though you were feeling fine a second ago, or you didn't even really think about how you were feeling a second ago, but now you're like feeling a sniffle coming on, or maybe you do have a headache. Maybe you are a little tired.
Right. And so I think about these as triangulating or just like another indicator, right? Someone else who's going to help make you make a decision, but they don't make the decision for you. So you have your feeling, you have the context of the plan, you maybe have coach feedback, and then you have this other thing that's monitoring, again, it's your heart rate. We could call this like a little bit of physiological insight. The autonomic nervous system, it's trying to get in there and see. Now, we want to be careful that we don't give that the only, it's the only voting member, right? It's now the CEO and there's no voting members. There's no board of directors. Everyone's, it's just this little watch on your wrist. One of the biggest things I've seen, we love Marco Altini, the HRV for Training app. This isn't sponsored. We pay for it. We pay for the Pro. I've used it now for years and years and years. I don't know how many years of data. Sometimes it's like my account. I'm like really early in it, and I love it. What I love about it is that it's simple. It's just on the phone. It's just a morning heart rate reading. There's pros and cons to the, all night readings that a lot of these wearables do versus just like a point measurement, a spot measurement in the morning like the HRV for Training does. But what Marco has written about, and he has a great Substack, I think is where Marco does his writing. He has a little bit on Medium. We'll put that in the show notes though, because if you are curious about all this like wearable and HRV stuff, he's got some great, getting started information, and then some of these are higher end concepts. One thing that he likes to always point out is that muscle soreness is not at all captured by wearables. It is impossible to capture this. But it's actually one of the biggest limiters to doing your workout, to feeling good. right? After so often I'll see this where athletes are like, oh, my HRV didn't even change, after a big adventure or something, but I feel like I can't walk.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, so this is interesting. Our runners, our strength trainers, CrossFitters, you might not actually see a ton of disruption in this. If you're a fit, consistent athlete, it actually takes a fair bit of effort, from an intense race or days and days and days of training to have a disruption from that baseline.
Sure.
So I think that's something just to keep in mind when you're talking about readiness. Pros are, very ready or not ready. It just can't measure it. So this is where we need to have this triangulation of your readiness, because that as just one example of just where that's at. It doesn't, we could list a couple other things that, motivation, right? How you're eating might not be captured immediately in it. So there's just a few things where these other stressors aren't all captured in this nervous system, especially, when it's maybe more short-term stuff.
For sure, yeah. And so I did a really labor-intensive piece for Canadian Cycling last year talking about sort of wearables and how, I've said it on here a million times, have we outsourced how we feel? And we've talked to a lot of different people about this over the last couple of years as these things have gotten more and more ubiquitous. What I found really interesting, and it's not something you necessarily need to do on the long term, but I think it does give you a good perspective, is I was getting up every morning and just giving myself a rating, scale of 1 to 10, how am I feeling? That was like the first thing I kind of just did a bit of a body scan, just thought about it for 30 seconds, and I recorded it in a Google Sheet. And then I would go in, and at the time, for the sake of this article, I was wearing a Whoop and an Oura ring. I was wearing my Garmin all day, or my Coros all day. So I was doing all the things, and I would record what all of them said after I recorded my subjective feeling. And sometimes it matched, and sometimes it didn't. And sometimes even the wearables disagreed with
each other.
Yeah. So they definitely, what I learned is there is valuable insight to be gained from them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But they definitely should not be the be all end all, because honestly, they are still just pieces of tech that are not foolproof. So there were times where both my Oura and my Whoop are guilty of this. They would say I didn't sleep well, but I felt super well rested. And maybe I'm wrong on it. Maybe the watch just didn't read it perfectly.
That's right. And so I think there's a lot of good takeaways there. I think that initial subjective, I think valuing the subjective is important as well. A lot of these wearables don't take in any subjective data. So they don't take in, your rating of muscle soreness, your overall motivation.
Or if they do take it in, it's actually weirdly hard to input it, is what I found.
That's right. And that's why we like HRV for training, because I sit there with my phone for a minute or two, take the HRV reading, and then it asks me a survey before it gives me any of the information that it just took. It asks for my survey, what have you been up to? I can log some notes. Did you have alcohol last night? And then it takes that, and a couple of them do get factored into the recommendation. If you're sick, it says maybe just take the day off, or light. It just says light. I don't know if it rarely says take it completely off. But the key is that if the sleep is actually not one that's factored into it, because Marco feels like the research says that even if you sleep poorly, if your physiology, the heart rate, the HRV, aren't reflected, it means that your body is actually coping with that stressor. So he says that it actually doesn't really make a lot of sense to have these combination scores that a lot of the wearables use, because that's not actually the point of it, to create one single metric where it's trying to guess at your readiness, because it's penalizing you for things that maybe your physiology is actually absorbing. Mm-hmm. And so then if you are trying to guess at, can I take on more load, if your body's actually taking on the load fine, then you want to be careful, right? In the same way that if you did a harder workout yesterday and your physiology's fine, it maybe shouldn't penalize you because you did a harder workout, mm-hmm. right? So that's where it gets tricky with these amalgam measures.
Right. And then the last note about wearables is it often takes a lot longer than the wearable would like you to think to actually like accurately figure out your
baseline
biorhythm and
the baseline. Yeah.
So if you're noticing stuff like that, and it's only been even 2 months since you got it, like sometimes it can take 3 or 4 months before it really accurately has dialed in your baseline, especially if you've done anything weird in any point during that 3 months. Because that's the other thing, is like if you had a training camp in the first month or any of that stuff, it can completely, or you had COVID or the flu or whatever, you've completely thrown off your baseline, and it can take a while for it to kind of figure out exactly where you're at.
And I'm glad. So, and I think what I see more often is, a lot of the apps will want you to keep going. So they'll like give you a baseline, say 7 days in.
Yeah, which is understandable, because like we all want
and
that
start giving, I mean, you have to get started. So, but then it'll start giving you recommendations, say a weekend or even day 2, it might give you but you have to be careful, because there isn't a good average, if you will, a good baseline. And I think 2 things that come off of this baseline concept are, it's your baseline, so it doesn't really matter what the number is, just your average is your average, and then we're looking for changes from your average. And changes mean up or down. So up higher isn't always better, or lower in the case of heart rate isn't always better. If you don't sleep for 2 days, you're going to actually start seeing, in a lot of cases, a higher HRV and a lower heart rate, a suppressed or depressed heart rate. What do we think that fit athletes have? Low heart rates and high HRV. So we don't always know if those changes are they don't always indicate like you're going to win the Olympics. It means that there's a disruption from your baseline.
Right.
If your average heart rate's 50, suddenly you're seeing 40, you probably know you didn't sleep, or you did an overnight flight or something like that. So that's, I think, the concept with these wearables is you're trying to track something, and then when we see, oh, you got a respiratory illness, you probably are going to see that resting heart rate come way out of baseline. Now it's 70. And then what that also helps you is, as you recover and start easing back into training, you'll see that heart rate gradually come back into baseline, which I always take as a great, okay, good, there we are, right? And then over the course of years, you can also see these patterns with HRV and heart rate, where when you're fit, getting towards your big, summer race, you can start seeing these trends too, where the HRV might start creeping a little bit, maybe heart rate changes a little bit. So on that macro, on the seasonal level, you can also see these cycles in HRV and heart rate, to yourself. And they're not always super significant. In some people, they are quite significant. It depends a little bit, but that's the idea. So baselines, cautious, they get 1 vote. They don't get the overriding vote. What was did we have other takeaways there?
I think that's something, and just never neglect your subjective data about how you actually feel.
And the plan. I think that's, something Marco drives home too. These aren't replacing the plan. They are not, making the decision on the day. All that they do is maybe if it's like, yeah, I didn't sleep, I feel like crap, and your app, your wearable is saying, I don't know, then maybe you go down and you do like an easier aerobic session rather than the high intensity intervals. I think that's really a good change that we could make, is if there's a couple factors there, that's where we would maybe modify down to an aerobic session that should in theory help us recover and help us drive, improve that, aerobic tone. So the HRV might come up if we did something like that too. Mm-hmm. If it was down, again, not that up is always better.
Yeah. I think maybe last note is just for anyone who's been, wearing wearables for a long time, or even if you just got started, just reminder, you don't need to wear them forever or all the time. Like, it's okay to take a break, especially if you feel like you are kind of caught in the tyranny of your wearable. If you feel like it is kind of controlling everything, or it's making you feel more anxious about it, you can take a break from it. Take a month where you don't wear it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't put it back on ever. Just give yourself that break from it and see,
Sure. I was telling you about this orthosomnia, where people would actually start having less sleep because they were so worried about waking up in the morning and having the device say that their sleep was bad, that they'd actually start sleeping less and worse, I guess. So orthosomnia is this idea that is sort of like orthorexia, where we eat really healthy to try and eat really healthy, but then we actually get less healthy because we, restrict our food too much or something.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been hearing on a lot of podcasts lately, for whether it's wellness or any random podcast I'm listening to, the podcasters seem to all have a Whoop or an Oura Ring. And again, I have both. Like, it's not that I don't ever use these things, but for some reason, the weird habit that I keep hearing them be like is like, yeah, I wake up and I check how my sleep was. And I'm like, wait, sorry, you're just like assuming that the thing is like the be all end all, like that's what you have to, that you're getting on your phone first thing in the morning, which is the thing we know is bad. Like, we are so aware that the getting on the phone first thing in the morning is the thing that we're not supposed to do. So it's very funny to me that now it's like the healthy thing to do is get on your phone instantly to check what your wearable is telling you.
For sure. And I think with something with sleep, you almost have an idea about this. DW is making an appearance here on the camera. We know how it is, and a lot of these things are long-term trends that we're looking at. So especially when you have these like slick wearables that have super low friction, in that like there's not a lot stopping you from collecting your Whoop data. They even have the battery charger that clips onto your wrist, right, so you never take it off. That's a good thing in some ways. There's trade-offs in all of this. But that's definitely, you have to be careful, right? Mm-hmm.
Ooh, on that note, pro tip, my good friend actually works at Oura and gave me this like a fantastic tip. If you do use an Oura Ring, put your charger in the bathroom and charge your ring every time you shower, because it's better to give your finger that break and have it actually like, dry. And that like is enough charge on the Oura to keep it going generally, if you just get in the habit of doing that. So just a hot tip for you if you're struggling to keep your Oura charged. Pros and cons of anything. So yeah, just a few thoughts, and definitely let us know if you have any questions regarding wearables. Obviously, this is a topic that we're very interested in, very like kind of passionate about, I would say. So yeah, love chatting about it. All right, last question. Actually, sort of to this wellnessy
sure,
influencer thing, as I was just talking about with the everyone's got an Oura Ring now. Seems like everyone is cold plunging and saunaing. Should I be doing that in addition to my training? And this is something I've been questioning lately. My coach David is very big on using the hot tub or sauna for heat adaptation, and it's pretty tempting, right? It seems like everyone is putting a cold plunge on their porch. I feel like if we did not have condo board regulations that do not allow us to have more than 1.5 liters of water on our porch at any time, which is really specific, I think I would probably have been influenced pretty heavily to be considering it. So
well,
where do you fall on this?
So, I mean, most stuff I'm pretty pessimistic on, I guess.
It's true.
So there's like big rocks in training. There's, or in health. You want to sleep, you want to eat enough and eat well, and then you have to train for the thing. So if this question is adding it to your training, most people don't have enough time to train. So I don't know. I just have a little problem. Like, most people don't have enough time to eat food, make food at home, cook it, grocery shop for good food, learn how to make good food, to get to sleep, and allow yourself enough time in bed that you can actually sleep for 8 hours plus or minus, and then to get in enough training. And what's enough training? I don't know. Like, probably most people could train more and see benefits for health and performance. So when I hear this stuff, I'm just like, I don't know. It strikes me as like the magic bullet, not the magic bullet, the product. It was a great product. No, that's not an ad. But
no, but if you want to sponsor us, by all means.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's good. A lot of people enjoy it. I've tried it. It's not that I'm not, I don't really like being cold, which, is probably a reason to do it, is to try it out and conquer that fear. So what I found is that my mood, which is generally a little morose, instantly improved off of it. Now, it was quite uncomfortable. I did not enjoy the process. I know you get better at it. And that's, I think, the other thing on the back end that I've seen with this stuff is you do adapt to stuff. So you have to be careful. Like, I don't know how long it would have the benefit, just like drugs or anything else at some point. So I think sometimes people get into this like daily routine of plunging. It's okay to have routines. If you find it great, good on you. Keep going with it. It's great. If it's serving you, keep doing it. I think there's probably an argument for more periodic, so that you're not adapting to it as much or overdoing it and that would be my third point, I guess, is that a lot of people are really stressed, and this is like definitely a stressor. Even if you enjoy it, even if your mood's better, like your mood is better because you just like got shocked into that. Right. So I think we want to be careful in the same way we're careful with exercise or drugs or anything else, that we don't end up with, overfilling our cups, to use the Greg Lehman analogy of stress. So if you are just on your limit and this is interpreted as a stressor and not as a relaxant, right, where we're taking water out of the cup. So this would be, I've heard Dan John even say, like, the hot tub just seems like a lot better option because it's pretty relaxing. Dan John doesn't do it for plasma volume like Molly's coach David endorses. He does it for relaxation, to balance out all the hard work in the gym that Dan John is doing or in work, right? And he talks about you need to balance the play, what's his thing? Play, pray, I don't know, whatever, work and something else.
Apologies.
There's a fourth thing so in any case, I think we want to be careful because a lot of us don't necessarily need more of that.
Yeah, and I mean, to add to that, I have heard a few different experts. I want to say it was Stacey Sims, but I might be lying. Apologies to Stacey if she loves ice plunging. But I have heard, especially for women, like the ice plunging or cold plunging and stuff, like can be not necessarily hormonally disruptive, but like not helpful hormonally for that exact reason. Like our bodies are already doing a lot of work to balance our hormones and like deal with the pressures of work and training. So yeah, to add this extra stressor it's a lot, especially during specific times in our cycles when we're already gonna be like down a peg.
Sure.
Just like throw this other thing at it. So definitely with women, I would be extremely cautious and even contemplate, like, I would say I would even look into kind of syncing it a bit more with my cycle. And Stacey's book Roar, which actually just got re-released, has a lot about sort of the 4 stages in your cycle and what to kind of focus on in each one for sort of optimizing your health and performance. So while I don't think you necessarily need to have your training and your cycle sync up perfectly, I would say whenever you're doing additives like that, or like that, fasting, any of that stuff, I do think you should take your cycle into account.
Well, in our first question, again, so if you like this and you're a cold plunger and you're breathing with Wim Hof, like, own it. Like, it's probably akin to training for you, but it is, you only have so much time in the day and money to buy all these things and do them properly and not hurt yourself. So it's an investment. If that's the way you want to spend your time, no shade. I think it was probably great benefits to be had. Again, I really like that if we're training for bike riding, there's probably the sleep, the good nutrition, and the bike riding. And a lot of times people want to complicate it with other stuff. I love a good gizmo, but that's...
No, you don't. You get so mad whenever I talk. I've been actually campaigning for a sauna blanket, to be totally frank here. I should not have even put this question into our thing. I should have just deleted it, or found a lot of reasons that a sauna blanket would be a good investment.
Oh, I didn't see that sauna was part of this. Well, let's get there in a second. I had another thought on... So we talked about periodization to start. This is probably something with cold, this ice, and we can talk about contrast bathing. For some people, you probably want to be careful because part of training is being sore. So we want to be careful that we're not blunting it. Now, a lot of people are so overstressed and maybe as we're getting older that like some of this icing and helping with, I don't know if it's going to help with inflammation or whatever, I don't know. But maybe there's some caution there too. Again, thinking maybe during the rest week or something like that. To your point about timing, I don't know exactly where I would put it in the week, but just probably be careful, I guess.
Well, I'm going to say, you definitely don't want to be doing it like after your hardest, longest workout. Probably don't jump directly into an ice bath for a couple reasons. One, like blunting the adaptations, but two, just if you've already extraordinarily stressed your body, it's probably not super
I don't know, because there's two, sometimes they say, you want to put all the high intensity on one day. So maybe it would be okay, but I don't know. I don't know if we have a clear answer for you there.
Proceed with caution, and we don't think it's a necessity. It's probably the two main takeaways there. But what about the sauna? And here we have to break it into two separate ones, right? We have actually three, let's say, like hot tubs. We've got traditional saunas, and then we've got the infrared sauna, and that seems to be the current trendy one. That's what you talk about when you talk about sauna blankets, tends to be...
Okay, well, this is a whole new world. I don't know that I can give you a ton of individual stuff about that, but I mean, we're talking about heat application. So there's the relaxation side of it. In the same way, I don't know what else would be like this, right? Like,
I'll tell you, I would love to be doing this podcast right now whilst wearing a sauna blanket.
I would love a sauna. Not even on a blanket. It sounds disgusting to me, but...
Can't have a sauna in the van, but we can have a sauna blanket in the van.
Heat is interesting because to me, the cold isn't, people will say, okay, the mental toughness or the breathing aspect of it, maybe there's a performance training piece to that. But to me, it's probably more grouped on the recovery side of things, I guess. The heat, I think, to your point, there's probably the two. There's the like Dan John relaxation, like we're getting a good soak in whenever you like to do your soak, or your good sauna. But like you're not pushing it where it's uncomfortable, and that's where the training is uncomfortable. So after you get in from your run, you then do 30 minutes of tubbing or sauna that's uncomfortable. Your heart rate is up as if you are training. Usually when this is happening, you're sweating, like there's no like sitting on the side of the hot tub when you get uncomfortable. We're doing this in a staged progressive manner, just like you would with training, but there's a certain, amounts of time and temperatures and stuff that you're trying to hit. In the same way that with your training, you're hitting certain durations and intensities. With these sauna and hot tub protocols, they're done in a certain protocol that is uncomfortable in the way that training is also uncomfortable. So I think there's probably those two groups. I think no problem with the hot tub, the relaxation bucket of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe you're careful, if you have bruising or something like that, but I think it's hard to go wrong with just like a quick sauna or relaxation session. Like if it's, in the same way that yoga is probably fine whenever, or a walk is fine whenever, assuming you don't push it to hot yoga or like super stretchy yoga or explosive yoga, like, extreme bending yoga. If it's just super easy, relaxing yoga or a walk, it's not a big deal. Again, walking could be like too extreme. You just walked the Colorado Trail and, at altitude or something up of, massive hills and downhills and massive pack. That gets extreme and is, more in the training bucket, the fatiguing bucket. Do you think we need to cover adding heat?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. And then I guess the last point I would have on that is when we used to do sauna stuff, our thing was we didn't have a sauna, obviously. We have a small condo that we love and prefer. But we were going to the local YMCA to use the sauna, which was across town, which was a long drive. And we gave that up pretty quickly. Even though you enjoyed the sauna and the benefits, the like 30 minutes in addition to the sauna time that it took to utilize it, just wasn't worth it. So it is worth like reflecting on, would you rather have that time? Is it going to make you cook the extra meal at home? Are you going to get the extra hour of sleep? Are you going to actually finish your full training? Or is it going to like relax you because you've gotten that extra hour to get your work done? So now you're not stressed on that report that's due.
Sure. And I mean, I at the time, I don't recall doing it specifically for like a heat adaptation. I was sort of doing it more for the like Scandinavian, relaxation, and it was sort of tied in around like post gym session or something. I don't know. Maybe it's because I come from Canada. The cold thing just makes no sense. We spend most of the time freezing. It just makes no sense to me. I'm sorry. I was trying to be restrained on this, but it just doesn't make sense. The heat thing, if you're from Arizona and it's 100 and, probably hopping in some ice makes a lot of sense.
This is true. A lot of the like fitness and wellness, like influencer types that are talking cold plunge, I think if we did a triangulation of where they are on a map, we would have just a preponderance of them in LA and Austin and Phoenix.
Sure. And so this is where nothing's bad. You can do whatever you want if you enjoy it and if it's serving you. But I do think that there's just that caution around the time and like what you're trying to get out of it. I think you need to be pretty clear about it. For some people, probably just turning the shower cold, which I do sometimes, and is that mentally tough if you stand in a cold shower for a minute or something? Like I think probably you'd get 90% 100% of that direction. You can do Wim Hof or breathing without the cold, I think, as well, whatever you're into. So I think there's lots of ways to access these things and try them out without going all the way.
Right.
But again, if you went all the way, that's okay. And if you enjoy it and the challenge is great and it fits into your day and your home and everything else, that's great. But to this, I guess, the specific question we got via Instagram, I believe, I would always check that those 3 rocks of sleep, good food, cooking it, eating it slowly, and then the training, right? Like if this is taking an hour to ice up your tub in the morning, like, God, I don't know, would zone 2 endurance training be a better way to spend that hour, assuming you have your, that hour of sleep isn't required? So rambling answer perhaps, but.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there. But if you have any other questions, definitely hit us up, consummateathlete.com, @consummateathlete on Instagram. You can watch this episode on YouTube or listen to it on whatever podcast player. And if you could leave us a rating, review, etc., that would be fantastic. We would deeply appreciate it. And all right, we are excited for next week's Valentine's Day episode. That's all I'm going to say. It's going to be a good one. Definitely check back in next Tuesday. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.